Good afternoon, everyone. We'll start in just a few moments. All right, good afternoon. Welcome to CRES Forum's event. Thank you for joining us today for how conservatives are planning to tackle climate change. My name is Rebecca Lorenzen. I am the policy manager with Citizens for Responsible Energy Solutions Forum. We are a 501c3 nonprofit that educates the public and influences the national conversation around clean energy solutions that are actionable, market-friendly, and responsible. And Charles Hernick, Vice President of Policy and Advocacy at CRES Forum, will be our moderator today. Just a few brief housekeeping notes before we begin. As attendees, you are all muted. However, we do encourage your participation through Q&A chat on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have any technical difficulties, please message me through the chat. And we also encourage you to participate on social media. On Twitter, our handle is CRES Forum, and you can also use the hashtag Clean Energy. Without further ado, I will now give the floor to Charles.
Thanks, Rebecca, and welcome everyone. Appreciate you joining today. We've got a great panel to dive in to provide an update on what conservatives have been doing recently and over the course of the past year on clean energy and climate change. It's really been a big year. And just recently with the House Conservative Climate Caucus, I'll tell just one story before we get started, but my wife has friends that live in Los Angeles that are in the business of being, social media influencers. And it got back to me through a couple of indirect channels that people were starting to track what conservatives were doing on climate change. And we've had a big year. There's a lot to be proud of. I'm very pleased that Payne Griffin from Senator Braun's office is here to join us, provide some introductory remarks on the Growing Climate Solutions Act, which passed the Senate with overwhelming bipartisan support, and that being led by Senator Braun, a Republican. So we'll hear a little bit about that story and then dive deep into some of the other updates and things that have been happening around Capitol Hill and Washington, D.C. with Kelly Donnelly, who's the Executive Vice President and General Counsel for Lot 16, Rich Powell, Executive Director of ClearPath, Marty Hall, Republican Staff Director for the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. And we'll have that panel conversation after some introductory remarks from Payne. But please do remember that this is an interactive dialogue that we're hoping to have here. I have a handful of questions pre-prepared, and each of our panelists and speakers has a story to tell. But if you do have any questions, I will direct you to the question and answer box. Click on that. Feel free to drop in any questions that you do have, and we'll reserve the last 15 minutes for attendee questions. So from the caucus to even in April on Earth Day, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy standing behind very proudly as 35 Republican bills were put forward to do something on climate change. Is it the final step? Definitely not, but we're making a lot of progress and seeing a lot of headway, and the Senate has been busy too. So I think we'll start here with Payne. If you want to unmute Payne, I would love for you to tell us the story of the Growing Climate Solutions Act. This is in my mind, an important bill because it is a limited government approach that would help raise the profile of voluntary carbon markets, and I'll underscore the voluntary nature of that. Farmers are able to participate, companies are able to participate. But if you could tell a little bit of the story from how so much robust support on both sides of the aisle was able to be achieved, corporations, large and small, ranging from McDonald's to Cargill to conservation organizations and American Farm Bureau, among many others, were among the list of supporters. Really a triumphant success. So I wanted to first say congratulations. And then also ask for a little bit of the story, if you'd be willing to share that.
Yeah, thank you, Charles, and I appreciate that introduction. You really got almost all of it. that is the story. Look, I obviously we were able to get this bill done in the Senate just before we left for recess in June. It was a huge bipartisan success. We had a final floor vote of 92-8. I haven't checked this, but a couple of people have told me that, to their knowledge, that was the first time the Senate had ever considered a standalone climate bill. We usually roll these things into either continuing resolutions or omnibus bills. So, it builds on a record that the Senate has produced in the last couple of years on significant climate policy that deserves some good attention. So, I think the key to this bill is that it was really driven by farmers. This bill came from a suggestion that Senator Braun received from a couple of farmers as he was touring the state in his first year in office. And so we took that idea and we structured it in a way with the principal objective of getting something that could pass with a really strong bipartisan vote. And so I think we were largely successful in that. There are a couple of key things that we were able to do. I think the most important is, Senator Braun is a conservative member of the Republican caucus, and he was able to structure a bill that didn't violate any major conservative principles, right? So as you mentioned, Charles, it was voluntary, but at the same time, it's a real solution. The carbon credit markets have a lot of promise. That they could really develop into something that's used by agriculture to a significant degree. But we're at a point now where, adding legitimacy to the marketplace, we think would be helpful. And that's what the bill does. So it provides a real solution, but in a way, as you said, that's voluntary. Another big consideration from Senator Braun's perspective is that the bill is essentially paid for. The original version of the bill, and this will get into one of my other points, that we had a significant, robust committee process, but the original version of the bill had a CBO score of 0, which for a climate bill is fairly unusual. And then, as we worked with the committee to develop the version that eventually came to the floor, we insisted that it be fully offset. And so we were able to provide that. CBO determined that it wouldn't increase the federal spending. It didn't increase the deficit. And so that was something that was really important to the senator. And I think that helped us with a lot of conservative members who ended up voting for the bill, like Senator Cruz. These are members that don't often vote for things that have large scores, and so we were able to keep them on board. The next thing that we really focused on was having a robust process. A lot of times when you get a bill to the floor, if you've jumped through jump past any of the hoops that you need to go through, that can create problems when you're trying to negotiate unanimous consent agreements to compress the process. And so, we had a legislative hearing in the last Congress. We had a significant committee negotiation at the beginning of the 117th Congress, and then had a markup where the bill came out of committee on voice vote. We had extensive stakeholder comments on the bill and interactions with our staff, Senator Stabenow's staff, Senator Bozeman's staff, as we were putting this all together. And then had a committee report and all the things that you would do in advance of bringing the bill to the floor. So we didn't jump through any of we didn't jump any of the normal steps you would have to take, and I think that was important. As we come to the floor, members feel more comfortable that this bill has been fully vetted. And then the last thing that we did, we had extensive stakeholder and agency consultations. We really, because the voluntary markets are at such a beginning phase of their potential, there's a real risk that federal overreach would do a lot to disrupt investment. And so we structured the bill in a way that we felt comfortable and the industry feels comfortable would be additive and not subtract on the progress that they have made. With the understanding that in certain circumstances there's still a long way to go. But we're adding a certification system that's going to add credibility to this growing marketplace. And so those consultations are really important. You have seen some other bills in the Congress that have been introduced, I think, without this consultation and could eventually have fairly negative effects on voluntary markets. And so that was something we really tried to avoid, and then had a lot of conversations with the USDA. We went through every line of the bill to make sure that we and the agency had the same interpretation of how the bill would be implemented and how each line would be read. And so I think that was important as well. At the end of the day, it's unusual that the Senate votes on a climate bill as a standalone on the floor. And so we learned a lot of lessons, but I think the Congress as a whole, the Senate as a whole, has been learning a lot of lessons over the last several years about how to move major pieces of climate policy, right? So the omnibus bill at the end of last year contained Senator Murkowski's energy bill, which had huge advancements in research and development, transmission, other aspects that a lot of people on this call have worked really hard to get across. It had the HFC bill that regulated hydrofluorocarbons, which was something that also had a significant committee process, although not as significant as Growing Climate Solutions, in the EPW committee last year, and that was something Senator Braun was also involved in. And then now we've done the Growing Climate Solutions Act with our 92 yes votes. And we brought it to the floor on a unanimous consent process, which, as I said, is somewhat unusual, as normally these things get packaged. I think some of the lessons we learned is that you have to have the right policy, and CRESS was very helpful in helping us identify that. There's been a lot of interest, bipartisan interest over the last couple of years in agriculture policy, particularly in relation to climate. And agriculture is a unique area, because usually when they're working on environmental, when the Agriculture Committee is discussing environmental solutions, be it any of the conservation programs or R&D funding, it's always done on a voluntary basis. And so we were able to take this framework and take that same voluntary basis that folks on the committee were already used to. And so I think that made it a little bit easier as we moved this bill through the committee. Another thing that we did that was really important is we got member buy-in from, we eventually had every member of the committee co-sponsor the bill, except for Senator McConnell, because he doesn't usually do that, but then McConnell voted for it on the floor. And in doing that, we had to do a lot of work with every member on the committee. For more than half of the Republicans on the committee, we made changes to the bill. So they had buy-in on different pieces of the legislation, and that was important in getting their support and making sure that the bill could stay intact as it made it through the process. And then I think the last thing that was helpful is, having something that's led from a conservative makes some of the people who may be the most, or what's the right word, concerned about climate policy or skeptical of climate policy, make them feel more comfortable. I think having Senator Braun lead an effort like this made folks feel that might not normally vote for a bill like this, made them feel like this was something that was vetted and that they could get behind, because Senator Braun is a fellow conservative, but also he really valued making a lot of the things in the bill structured in a way that they wouldn't violate his principles or the principles of other conservatives, like I said, about having it offset and making sure the program was voluntary and other things that are in there. So I think there are a lot of lessons that we can still learn. There's still a lot to go. We have to make this bill somehow negotiate its way through the House, which is something that we're working on now. But I'm happy to take a couple questions.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. This is really great storytelling, and I think very helpful for understanding not just the genesis, but the path for success here. And I think my question is what can we learn from the Growing Climate Solutions Act passage that would be something we could replicate for other technologies or other climate bills? I think that's part of what folks who are concerned about climate change, which is almost everybody in America, want to see Congress do more. From my listening to what you've said, it sounded like this was a conservative policy to begin with. There were no concessions from a conservative standpoint that needed to be made, but a flexible approach that the senator maintained to be able to bring in and build get more buy-in and build a coalition of support in the public sector, in the private sector, with advocacy nonprofits. CRESS was among the many organizations that was a real big supporter and continues to be. What do you think we can learn from this bill or this process that's important for advocates that are on the line who are interested in seeing this same type of success repeated for other sectors?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of things. One of them is, you have to focus on what's possible, right? A lot of outside organizations come to Congress with these lofty ideas about things that aren't possible. And look, we didn't secure everybody, right? We lost several Democrats. We lost 2 Republicans, Senator Hawley and Senator Inhofe. On the Democrat side, we lost Warren and Senator Sanders and a couple of others. So, there is still some opposition in the Congress to the bill, but it's something that is, and the whole time we always knew that if this bill came to the floor, it would pass. And I think that's one of the key things you have to focus on. And then from that, trying to secure some of the flanks that you may be worried about from our position, making sure that Republicans were comfortable was a big priority of Senator Braun. Both from Senator Braun and Senator Stabenow doing something that was real. I think you have to check all those boxes. It's so difficult to bring legislation like this to the floor, particularly through a consent process where every member has to agree that they're willing to take a vote on it. That you have to cover all your bases, and that's both on the policy side, on the procedural side. You have to have something that's broadly popular, and the Growing Climate Solutions Act is very popular. So every once in a while you sort of hit the trifecta of all those things, and you're able to get something done. But identifying that at the beginning, I think, is helpful and something that the senator was able to do very successfully.
That's great to hear. Thanks, Payne, for all of this commentary. I know that you've got another meeting to run to very shortly, but I just my understanding, and I've tried to do my due diligence and research, is that you're correct. This is the first standalone climate bill that's ever passed the Senate on a bipartisan basis. I want to offer my congratulations to the senator. It takes real leadership to make something like that happen. But where there is leadership from a member, there are a lot of staffers sweating it out. And I know that you and many of your colleagues were working for a long time to make this success happen. So thank you for all of that work, and we'll look forward to continuing to work with you in the years ahead.
Well, I apologize why I'm not in a coat. I just got back from vacation while I was trying to rest before we start working on the house. So I would agree with those comments, but no, I appreciate it. And it was thanks to everybody. We couldn't have gotten this done without the stakeholder engagement. We couldn't have gotten it done without Cress's help. And so we have a long way to go. We've got to negotiate this bill through the House, but I think we have a good path forward, and we look forward to getting that done. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Payne. We'll go ahead and switch over to our panel now. Again, we have Kelly Donnelly with Lot 16, Rich Powell, ClearPath, and Marty Hall with the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. And I'm in the habit of never reading bios. They'll soon be dropped into the chat here, so you'll be able to look at each of our panelists' very impressive careers. And I usually offer an explanation for like how we picked the panel, and if we're talking about energy storage, like who these companies are and why they matter. But for this event, I just picked the 3 most influential conservatives that I could think of, and we asked you to participate. So thank you, Kelly, Marty, and Rich for joining this conversation here. Let's jump right in, and Payne mentioned this. We'll do a round robin, and we'll have each of our panelists speak here quickly. But Kelly, I'll start with you because Payne did mention the year. And if we're looking back a full calendar year, Senator Murkowski was eagerly working on an energy bill that did pass and was included in the appropriations omnibus that passed at the close of 2020. And at least in my mind, that really set the trajectory for, number one, a prioritization of energy and clean energy, and number two, the realization that climate change and clean energy are moving into the bipartisan space where real action can take place. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, Lot 16, and then because you've got a new role there compared to where you were during the passage of that bill. But if you could also speak a little bit to what that legislative success means for conservative engagement on clean energy and climate change now in 2021.
Well, sure, and thank you for having me here today. I really appreciate it. I'm Kelly Donnelly, and until last year, I was a longtime Senate staffer for the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. I first started in 2003 under then Chairman Pete Domenici and ended in the middle of the pandemic where I had been the chief counsel for then Chairman Lisa Murkowski. So I worked on the 2005 Energy Policy Act, the 2007 Energy Independent Security Act, and now didn't actually see the enactment of the Energy Act of 2020, but certainly did work on it. And just need to reiterate Payne's point about the importance of process. And that bill had a lot of process. We took over measures from about 70 members who had co-sponsored or sponsored outright these measures. Every single measure had a hearing at the committee level. It had gone through a business meeting and been reported out by the committee on a bipartisan basis. Individual measures, so individual bills were actually reported out of the committee. And we had been doing this for the entirety of the Congress. And then at the end, well, actually, let me back up. We had actually brought a big energy bill to the floor right before I had left. In fact, I stayed a little bit longer to see if we could get this across the finish line. Ultimately, we weren't able to because of an HFC, non-jurisdictional issue. We got tripped up. But when that ended up getting worked up, the energy bill got revitalized. And I have to say, like, never discount Lisa Murkowski, right? Like, she just would not stop working, and she just doesn't stop working. And I thought it was a great, and fitting end to her tenure as chair to get this across the finish line. But it hitched the ride on the omnibus appropriations measure at the end as Division C for this big energy Energy Act of 2020. And it was really the first time that Congress had updated its comprehensive energy laws since the 2007 Act, so for 13 years. And really, it was a bipartisan effort. And this was something that then Chairman Murkowski had worked with her then ranking member Joe Manchin to figure out, well, where were the areas of agreement? And I'm sure folks out there recognize that ENR has long been one of the most bipartisan committees in the Senate. They wanted to work within that tradition, and the two leaders from the two parties had decided that it really was research and development and innovation was the sweet spot. And for Senator Murkowski, she's made the point a number of times that things don't necessarily need to be labeled climate change to actually have a positive result in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Yep. And the Energy Act of 2020 has a lot of fantastic provisions that do help realize the goal of lowering greenhouse gas emissions, from CCUS, more renewables, energy storage, which was a new one for the committee. A lot of these bills had been kicking around over the years and maybe had been revised and updated, but energy storage was a new issue that the committee had tackled that had a lot of bipartisan interest from both sides of the aisle, which was fantastic. But also had loan guarantee reform, next generation nuclear, critical minerals, energy efficiency, really just ran the gamut. And again, it set the foundation, I think, for this Congress because you had all these big authorization levels in there. It wasn't directed spending, but authorization levels. It showed the direction where Congress wanted to go. It had a new technology transfer office at DOE to try to bridge the valley of death from R&D to commercialization. So a lot of really great provisions in there that now the new administration can come in and do the funding of them in the back end, or already have the existing authorities to move forward. So some great work by the Energy Committee. And now, of course, we're seeing another effort, a bipartisan infrastructure effort that I can get into now, or we can go in a little bit. But it's really, I think the result of that is Republicans coming to the table and demanding a bipartisan process. And it started with Senator Shelley Moore Capito in her negotiations with the White House, and then we're picked up by the Gang of 21, led by Senators Portman and Murkowski and a whole host of other Republican members who wanted to see an infrastructure package go by regular order. And so I think the process is incredibly important. It's what enabled us to get the Energy Act of 2020 actually done and enacted. And I think the process is going to prove to be important now for a bipartisan infrastructure effort in the Senate.
Thanks, Kelly. That's an important coverage, I think, for the starting point. You said the magic word, infrastructure. Let's dive a little further into that in our next round of comments. But Rich, I'd like to turn it over to you. If you could introduce yourself, ClearPath and talk a little bit about what's new at ClearPath. I know you all have been on a growth trajectory, been able to bring on new staff during the pandemic, delved into new issue areas. It seems like exciting times from the outside there, and in our conversations, I know that there's a lot new. If you could share a little bit about where you're seeing the most interest from conservative members on clean energy and climate, and how ClearPath is helping to meet some of that demand, and what's changed over the course of the past year, that'd be great. You're on mute. Don't worry, that has to happen once on every call. There you go. No. Still no. Still no. I wonder. Huh. Still not. Well, Rich, we'll let you keep toggling around, and then you can interrupt Marty as soon as you figured it out how. Marty, I'll turn it over to you just to keep things moving along here. We had Rich's audio earlier, so I know that we'll be able to get it back. Joining us from the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, which I think has made enough headlines that folks know what it is. But there's also been a Conservative Climate Caucus in the House, a new task force that has been announced to work on energy, climate, and conservation. Marty, if you could just, number one, introduce yourself and your current role, but also your view in terms of other things that are happening, in the House, these other entities. What's the relationship to the Select Committee, and what are House Republicans up to on climate change that's new in the past year?
Sure. Well, a little background, like as you mentioned, Charles, I'm staff director right now for the Select Climate Committee on the House side. Prior to that, I was with Business Roundtable. Prior to that, I spent close to a decade in the energy industry, and then before that, I was chief of staff over at CEQ during the Bush administration, and then Kelly and I were in the Senate together years ago when I was on EPW. So quite a wide range, and as Kelly said, I in a way still think myself as a Senate staffer. So no, there has been a lot going on in the past year or so when you look at Republican engagement in this. So just a little background to divide the three things you mentioned. Obviously, Select Committee is a committee created by the Congress that was extended into this Congress as well. The caucus, the Conservative Climate Caucus, was established by John Curtis, congressman from Utah, a really good guy who's very interested in this issue. It is a House caucus, so it is not an official committee, but it is a caucus open to any Republican members. The primary goal of that caucus is frankly to educate members on this issue and how conservatives have engaged, are engaging, and can engage in this issue, and provide a forum for education. Over the past couple of years, we've seen significant engagement. I think, do we have Rich?
I think we can hear Rich now.
But I don't want to interrupt Marty. He's on a roll.
Too late.
Keep going, Marty. Then we'll turn it over to Rich.
No. So, the point of the caucus is an education forum. Look, it was stood up a couple weeks ago, and it's already got close to 70 plus members, I think, including most of the relevant ranking members. I think there's a lot of excitement around that. There's a lot of excitement with conservatives about getting engaged on this issue, how to get engaged on this issue, and getting educated. The task force is slightly different. The task force is a leadership designated group. There were, I think, 6 or 7 task force created by Leader McCarthy a couple weeks ago, ranging the gamut, built off the model of the China task force from last year. Members of that were picked by leadership. Garrett Graves is leading that group, chair of the group, or leader, however you want to do it. He's also on the caucus, and John Curtis is also on the task force.
Yep.
So the point of that is over the next 18 months to take a real deep dive on the issue, both from an education standpoint, a policy standpoint, how to build on what we've done, and then to create agenda going into next Congress that hopefully the goal being a Congress with the Speaker McCarthy. So on day one, there will be a legislative agenda with both legislation and legislative principles for other things dealing with energy, climate, and conservation. So it is more of a leadership designated group to develop an agenda, to put out reports, probably put out papers and reports over the next 18 months as well. And the caucus is an educational piece, while not directly linked to the task force, will certainly be leveraged by the task force as an opportunity to educate members as we go along with the task force. So a lot going on, a lot of interest, a lot of engagement. And frankly, a lot of this is due in large part because Republican members are becoming more comfortable getting engaged in this issue, recognizing their conservative principles actually work to solve this issue, particularly when you think about from a global standpoint and how important things being economical are. And the engagement of Crest and ClearPath has been really helpful in getting these members comfortable to participate in that debate. So now that Rich is back.
Yeah, that's great to hear, and a good transition to Rich. And I think that's maybe the most impressive thing that I've seen looking at the House is that it is from leadership. There is a movement coming from leadership, coming kind of organically from members themselves to engage more on the issue of climate, get educated, to your point on the caucus's relation to all of it. So that's great. We'll dive in a little bit more. Rich, I do want to give you the microphone now that it's working. Thanks for making it work. What's new at ClearPath? What are you tracking in terms of what conservatives are doing on clean energy and climate right now?
Just to confirm, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So sorry about the technical difficulties. Hi, Charles, thank you. Rebecca, thank you. Crest, thank you for hosting this. And it's a real honor to be here with Kelly and Marty and and Tane now and Absentia. I mean, these are real leaders in making real conservative climate and clean energy policy. And so we're incredibly lucky to have them working these issues either on or now off the Hill. It has been just an incredibly exciting couple of years. I mean, as I think back to when ClearPath was founded now about 7 years ago, the difference between the state of the conversation back then around conservative climate policy and today is pretty extraordinary. I mean, to see a couple of weeks ago the near simultaneous launch of the caucus and the task force, and be able to sort of stand there with Heather from Crest, and obviously Mr. Curtis and Mr. Graves as all these things were launched is really an incredible thing now to see conservatives stepping forward. I'm going to start, I think, where maybe Kelly left off with the Energy Act, and just sort of thinking about big priorities and big new opportunities this year. We do think now that a major priority moves to implementing the Energy Act. As Kelly mentioned, authorizations are great, and they're only the beginning of a journey to actually get the remarkable suite of policies done, which were set up in the Energy Act. Just as a quick context for folks, the Energy Act set up the most aggressive Manhattan-style project to demonstrate new clean energy technologies that we'll ever have taken on in this country. More than 20 commercial-scale new technology demonstrations across carbon capture for power plants and industrial facilities, direct air capture right out of the atmosphere, advanced nuclear energy, energy storage, advanced geothermal energy. All of these things demonstrated in the marketplace by the mid 2020s. I think the last of the timelines goes out to 2027. That's an enormous project for the Department of Energy. That's an enormous project for the appropriations process to get all those things funded. That's an enormous project for the private sector to come in massive cost share with the federal government and setting all those things up. It's a huge gauntlet thrown to the clean energy innovators of this country. We do share, Kelly's thought that the G21 structure here potentially offers a really golden opportunity to greatly accelerate that process. It was going to be a pretty heavy lift, frankly, to get all of the needed dollars appropriated over the next 5 to 7 years to make all those demonstrations happen. And if we can put a big down payment to many of those projects as part of a bipartisan infrastructure bill, that seems like a remarkable opportunity, both to actually develop this clean energy infrastructure, enhance good paying jobs in the energy sector, and actually get us into a more competitive posture in demonstrating all these technologies. And what's so exciting about the negotiations as they're going today, and a lot of it's being obviously led by folks like Senator Murkowski, Senator Cassidy from Louisiana, who's been really engaged, particularly on the energy demonstration side, is that they're actually going even beyond the Energy Act. And they're proposing things like hubs for the creation of clean hydrogen and direct air capture facilities, and taking things like the SCALE Act, which was recently introduced, which really focuses on getting CO2 pipelines stood up and financed as well. So I think that there's just a remarkable opportunity there. Obviously a long path to actual passage, but I think a remarkable opportunity there. We're pretty deeply engaged in that. Next, as we think ahead, into the late 2020s, we're going to demonstrate all these things, but that'll only be the first of a kind for all of these. And there's a big road from getting from the first of a kind commercial demonstration to something that's actually gotten the real scale sufficient to bring the cost down and really prove out the technology so that the markets can fully embrace it. And I think conservatives have started to step forward with a really innovative new way to think about deploying these technologies through their early stages, and that's the Energy Sector Innovation Credit. This is now a bipartisan, bicameral set of legislative proposals. Right now it's being led by Ranking Member Crapo of Senate Finance in the Senate in collaboration with Senator Whitehouse on the Democratic side, and in the House by Reid and Jimmy Panetta, but with Representative Schweikert and LaHood, for also Republicans from the Ways and Means Committee on as well. This would be an enormous suite of incentives for innovative new clean energy technologies, and really learn from a lot of the mistakes of the past in how we've incented clean energy technologies and distorted markets and other things. So it's got a really interesting new structure, and I think that there's a lot of promise there, particularly now that we've got great leadership from both Senate Finance and House Ways and Means bought into that. And then the last thing I'll say is I think we've got this growing acknowledgement, and frankly, conservatives have been there for a long time. I think there's a growing acknowledgement on the left that this is a problem as well. There's a drive we like to call cleaner, faster, which is that, pick your timeline for developing a clean energy future, right? Getting to net zero, whatever. It's almost definitely economically possible. It's almost definitely technically possible, or becoming increasingly technically possible. And right now it is procedurally impossible, because every single one of those projects starts with a permit. Yep. And as Kelly knows and could tell us, all day long, to try to relicense a hydropower project in this country, to try to set up a new grid scale pump storage system in this country, try to site a new transmission line across states in this country. These things are hopelessly mired in a regulatory morass around NEPA and related regulatory hurdles, and we need to find a way to cut through that and get projects either to a clear yes or no answer on going forward and on permitting and a dramatically different timeline than we have so far. And I'm excited to say that we've been involved in some efforts like the Aspen Institute's Cleaner Faster effort, which was co-chaired by a terrific bipartisan set of former chairs of the Council on Environmental Quality in Katie McGinty and Jim Connaughton. I think that's rolled out to significant interest in both chambers. There's already a significant Republican-led legislation on reforming the NEPA process already out there from Congressman Graves. Congressman Schweikert has his new legislation on this as well. I think, frankly, Republicans are there all day long on this one. It's actually convincing Democrats that they need to come along and agree that if we're going to build clean, we've got to build it a lot faster and a lot more cheaply than we've been doing it. So I'll stop there. And thanks again.
Yeah, Rich, what you've said is super helpful, and I think an important part for framing how Republicans are approaching climate change. I think that there is, in the media, this narrative of what is a comprehensive climate plan. And I think in my mind, that doesn't mean a big spending approach that touches every aspect of the government and everyone's wallet in America. but instead something that addresses the key issues that we need to resolve to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, not just in the US, but globally. And you touched on some of them, the technologies, making sure that they are available and making sure that we're reducing the costs, not just piloting the projects, but helping to get to that deployment so that the market can take up these issues so that we can focus on permitting and reform and licensing so that we can get projects developed in a timely way. If we're looking at mid-century 2050 targets and goals, if it's taking 7 to 10 years to permit and license something, that's a much shorter clock than the one I would like to be working from. So you raised a number of really good issues there, and I think that's something that we want folks to understand, is that conservatives may not be looking for the biggest ticket items, but these are precision policies that could really make a difference to reduce greenhouse gas emissions quickly. Kelly, I want to turn it back over to you, and I do want to invite folks to, we've got a couple of questions coming into the Q&A. I would love for the audience to jump in more. I'll ask another round of questions here, and then we can turn it over to questions from the audience. But Kelly, we are working in real time. I've heard more than once that pencils need to come down pretty quickly, and then maybe not. It's like a hurry up and wait. What does the next week look like in terms of this energy infrastructure package and the ability to fold in clean energy and climate priorities?
Yeah, so that's a great question. All eyes are on my old committee to see if they can go forward with a business meeting markup next Wednesday, July 14th. And so we've got something kind of going in parallel. We've got this gang of 21 trying to come up with they've agreed to an infrastructure framework with the White House. They're now trying to write the language. As part of that, the Energy Committee under Chairman Manchin is trying to advance its energy bill kind of offering to this bipartisan package through a committee markup process, which is going to happen on Wednesday. And that has got the support, or we think it has the support, of Senator Murkowski and Senator Cassidy. And somebody had mentioned, what a leader Senator Cassidy has been on this, and that is true. He's been very, very involved in these negotiations. And it's my understanding that that Ranking Member Barrasso is engaging at the staff level on these negotiations, as well as our other Republicans. I mean, there's a lot in this package right now that is attractive to both sides. I have to say, I think one of the most meaningful provisions that's in that discussion draft that will be considered next week is the backstop siting authority for electric transmission. This is something that Congress has not tackled since the 2005 Energy Policy Act. And some folks might remember how hard fought those provisions were, and they ended up not actually working the way Congress intended and not actually getting any transmission sited. But at the end of the day, renewables aren't wireless. And if we're going to have a clean energy future, you're going to have the transmission that supports it. And so part of this bill has beefed up federal backstop siting authority, which would allow FERC in these designated corridors to override a state decision. And so Republicans need to consider where they are on that. I understand at the staff level, they understand the need for it and could get there on policy. As always with eminent domain, there'll be some of the trickier parts. But it looks like they will be able to go forward with this business meeting. And then the following week, the week of the 19th, is when Senator Schumer reportedly wants to package up the various pieces of the infrastructure measure and have them on the Senate floor for consideration. So it's moving incredibly quickly, kind of in real time while we were here. One of the sticking points, I think, for Republicans on the Energy Committee has been that the bill has directed funding, which you typically don't see out of an authorizing committee like the Energy Committee. And frankly, if it had been introduced as a freestanding bill with the directed spending in it, it would have been referred to the Appropriations Committee. It wouldn't have actually gone to the Energy Committee. It's been the process has been a sticking point for Republicans, and the $100 billion price tag has been a sticking point for Republicans. And now hearing that Manchin might be backing off of the directed funding to bring in more Republican support. I think if he does that, it could be a game changer in the committee and get more Republicans on board, because there are a lot of underlying measures in the bill that they're very interested in advancing.
Thanks, Kelly. And you mentioned a lot there. There's certainly a lot to track. It is timely. It's also not without controversy. Your mention of FERC backstopping or backstop siting authority made me think of it was just a Supreme Court case like a couple of weeks ago where the Supreme Court upheld FERC's authority, the federal government's ability to, in a pipeline case, I think it was in New Jersey, So it's not without stress that staffers, I'm sure, are trying to figure out what the best approach here is going to be. But these are real options that have worked for oil and gas. If we're to bring forward a clean energy economy and look forward to bridging the gap between where people are and where some renewable energy can be generated, we're going to have to look at some of these important issue areas, and I'm glad to see that folks are tracking that. I'm getting a couple of questions in the Q&A, and instead of running from my questions, I'd like to ask one of these, and maybe Rich or Marty, if you wanted to jump in here. But I think it's a good one. We're talking about what conservatives have been doing and where we're headed on climate, but the question from an attendee is, do conservatives have a credibility problem when it comes to approaching climate change? I would argue no, but and give you my reasons why. But I'm not sure if either one of you wants to talk about credibility in terms of how conservatives can be tackling the climate change issue.
Rich, want me to take that one?
Sure.
Thanks. Look, I think there's a historical issue with Republicans and climate change. No question about it. I don't think we can run from it. But that historical issue has long been history over the last decade or so, even going back to look when George Bush was president. Someone go back and read his April 16th, 2008 speech on climate. He laid out an agenda that day on how we reduce global emissions, how we need to develop technology to do so. So yeah, there is a historical issue going back, but people need to be paying attention to where we've been the last 10, 15 plus years. And that is really about what we haven't done well is engaged in the issue. So it's the credibility is based on assumption of where some members of the party were years ago, but the lack of engagement on the issue has basically left that field to others to talk about the facts that matter, to set the playing field of how to approach this issue. And it's left this impression that if we don't do certain things, then we're not engaged on the issue and we're not being effective or being active on the issue. And all those center around policies that will increase the cost of energy, policies that will make it harder to produce here, and policies that will make it less competitive. So I think we need to change that narrative on what are the facts that really matter here. And as Republicans understand those facts, they do become more engaged and they realize that the conservative principles are what's going to solve this issue long term. Look, we can't solve this issue by increasing energy cost. We just can't, because this is a global issue. One of the things with conservatives, we're not constrained by the religion of climate change. We're not constrained by going in and saying, I have to be against X, Y, Z, whatever that energy resource is. We are truly focused on reducing global emissions. We're not focused on reducing energy choices. And I know that's something that Cress says all the time. And the other important piece is it has to work here and abroad. If we're focusing on policies that increase the cost of energy, they will never be adopted overseas. And today we're about 13% of global emissions. By the end of the decade, we'll be about 8 or 9 or 10% of global emissions. 70% of global emissions are from developing countries, and they want to develop. And they're not going to spend more for energy just because it reduces their emissions. So I think there is, back to your original question, there is a historical stigma, but if you really pay attention to where we have been the last 10 or 12 years, it's really been one of engagement, not credibility. So,
Richard, Kelly, anything to add on the credibility question?
I think I would just echo Marty's point. I think that an issue has been that conservatives have been reluctant to discuss their clean energy agenda in climate terms, right? So if conservatives just said, yeah, we've passed major climate policy in the last several years. We hugely expanded the 45Q tax incentive for capturing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and storing it safely underground. We've increased, R&D on innovative clean energy technologies by more than 40% over the past 4 Congresses, all signed into law by by President Trump. And, at the end of 2020, we passed the largest clean energy and climate bill in more than a decade since Kelly last worked on them with the ISA 2007 and EPAC 2005. We're fully engaged on climate. We're leading a global effort to innovate, our way globally out of this challenge. If that was the language that we used to discuss this, right, I think that we perhaps would get more credit for it. We obviously have been one of the many groups, along with Crest, encouraging conservatives to talk about these wins more in climate terms, because that's where so many centrist voters are. That's where so many young people are around this, and we're not getting the political upside from a lot of the activities that we're taking. One last great example of this is, there are a number of policymakers who are hugely supportive of nuclear energy. They don't talk about that in climate terms. If you wanted to look at somebody who's really meaningfully changed probably the global emissions figure, that would be Senator Inhofe. And he would hate me saying right now that he's a climate champion. But actions are louder than words. And I think he's made a significant contribution to global emissions, certainly to U.S. emissions, by being such a champion for that industry and ensuring that we've got a strong nuclear fleet. So, I think in large part, it's an issue of the way we talk about what we're doing, even more than the substance of what we're doing.
And I look, just to echo real quick on Rich, I think the actions Republicans have taken, maybe not using the words climate change, when we look back 20 years from now, will be the most consequential, whether it's 45Q, the bill that Kelly worked so hard on. I think that's probably the most consequential thing that's been done for climate change globally ever, to be quite honest. Because looking back, it will be that action that developed the technology that's going to result in reducing the global emissions to the point that matters.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing here, and Kelly, feel free to jump in. But in my mind, I think that it's worth accepting and firmly addressing the fact there have been some conservatives that were reluctant to talk about climate change, straight up denied the issue. That was not helpful for our credibility. But where Republicans and conservatives have been consistent is for low-cost energy, abundant supplies of energy, and when you look at investment in that next generation, it's tax credits that were signed into law by Republicans and signed by President Bush that were an instrumental part for making it so that now solar and wind are deployable at scale without subsidies, and are cost competitive with any other type of technology, including natural gas, and that the United States is competitive in natural gas, not just here for having low cost energy, but globally, and has emerged as a global leader. That's a major part of the story for how the U.S. has been able to reduce its emissions more than any other country. And Marty, to your point, we're going to continue to be a shrinking part of the pie because of that leadership.
And don't forget when you talk about natural gas. And don't forget when you talk about natural gas and U.S. produced natural gas, the fact that when you look at life cycle emissions of natural gas exported, look, Russian natural gas exported to Europe has a life cycle emission 41% higher than U.S. LNG exported to Europe. So to the extent the globe is going to require natural gas, we should be the ones supplying it. Then we should use innovation to make it even cleaner. So it's that point of resources, American resources, and American innovation to do it even better, to take advantage of American competitiveness. So.
Yeah, thanks, Marty. Absolutely true. I'm going to combine two questions here. One, is there a financial bubble, or I would say overinvestment in conventional coal, gas, nuclear, hydro, considering the substantial cost reductions that we've seen, as I just mentioned, for solar and wind in particular, and energy storage costs are coming down too. Is there overinvestment in some of these existing asset classes? And then a separate but I think related question is, what's the panel's perspective on the bipartisan McKinley-Schrader proposal in the House? And so I think that maybe the root of both of these is we're looking at this transition from a lot of legacy assets where there's been 100 years of investment to assure that we have reliable power. What does that trajectory look like from a policy standpoint? Are there any particular areas that you all want to jump in on that you're excited about or are important for, number one, keeping jobs in the energy sector, but also growing this clean energy economy?
Hey, Charles, can I say a word about the first question about the overinvestment?
Yeah.
So let me just first say, and I think we should separate the technologies that were referenced there. First into the zero emitting technologies, so nuclear and hydro, and then into the traditional technologies, coal and gas. So, what is crystal clear from all of the modeling of a low carbon grid is that attempting to do that entirely with variable renewable energy, so attempting to do that entirely with wind and solar, is an incredibly expensive and potentially impossible proposition, at least across all of the United States, given the regional variability in wind and solar and the difficulty in siting transmission lines and the seasonal variability of those technologies. So it is crystal clear that we need some portion of a future low or zero emissions grid to be firm and dispatchable zero emission sources. And the options right now for those are what we have on the grid, which is nuclear and hydro. And so kind of priority one for any clean energy policy must be don't take any steps backward, right? Don't let one more nuclear plant close. Don't let one more large hydro facility go down, because every one of those you lose is a priceless asset. It's very, very difficult to recreate today. Step two is build as much wind and solar as you can, because those are great technologies. The costs have come down, right? And we want to take advantage of a lot of that, zero marginal cost resource. But then step three is there's going to be a gap. There will be a point where even if we preserve all the nuclear and hydro, and we build a lot of wind and solar, there's still some portion of the grid. And these are the parts of the country that don't have great access to wind and solar, like large parts of the Southeast, or the parts of the country like the upper Midwest that might have great wind in some parts of the year, but in the dead of winter have long, cloudy, dark periods with very little wind and extremely cold snaps, right? Where they're just going to need some other technology. All the utilities are real clear on this, that they need a zero emission load following technology. That's what Duke Energy calls it, the Zephyr technology. It's a bit of a unicorn right now. I think the options for that are advanced nuclear energy, some huge breakthrough in long duration energy storage, but it would have to be really, really different than today's storage technologies, like 90% cheaper than today's storage technologies, or some way to continue using that coal and gas fleet, but to do it without the emissions, to do it with carbon capture. And so that is the real priority in energy innovation, is finding some, ideally multiple, of those technologies that we can rely on for that last part. In some parts of the country, that might be 50% of the solution. In other parts of the country, it might only be 20, depending on how good their renewable assets are. But this is why we need the portfolio, and we can't just talk about going all in on wind and solar, even as they're getting very inexpensive.
Very well said, Rich. And I will flag that we're coming up at the top of the hour. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and we'll end right at 1 o'clock. But Marty or Kelly, if you want to jump in here, I'd love closing thoughts from you on this question and what Rich just said.
Well, I was going to maybe tackle the CES portion of it, because we've heard so much about the need for CES, how the Democrats really want to get a clean energy standard in place. Looking at reconciliation to try to do that, which I have to say I've worked on reconciliation. I think that's a very, very difficult thing to try to shoehorn into reconciliation. But the McKinley-Schrader bill, it's worth noting that it is the only bipartisan CES proposal out there. And McKinley, when he introduced it, picked up a new Republican co-sponsor, Representative Tenney from New York. So they've got a couple of Republicans on that. It has kind of a 10-year glide path before folks have to start complying. So it's an innovate and then regulate type of legislation. And, and I think it's worth considering something like that. I know that the majority party would like to be more ambitious and have a more ambitious timetable to get this done. I don't know that that's even feasible on a technological basis. I think that they should look at the McKinley-Schrader bill and consider trying to take it through regular order, because I think the reconciliation process is not really going to work. You'll end up with the penalty portion of it, really, and not a fleshed out program, if that's what folks are trying to do. So it's great to see Republicans engaged on that type of policy, because it's always really been a Democratic proposal. But I think it's worthy of consideration. And if anything could get Chairman Manchin's vote, I think it's the McKinley-Schrader bill.
Very insightful. Marty, go ahead.
Let me build upon what Rich was talking about. I think one of the things we have to keep in mind too is as we look at this through the domestic lens, we also have to make sure we're looking at it through the global lens. So we want to make sure that we don't have a portfolio here or a focus here on technology that is not exportable globally. One of the things that we have to be careful of is that we turn investment away from the technology and the resources that are going to be used globally, because if we don't develop that technology, chances are it's not going to get developed. If we focus on other technology, then we're going to delay the development of the technology necessary to address the 90% or the 70% of global emissions. So we have to be very cognizant of our actions and the impact they'll have on reducing global emissions. That's why the technology approach is so important, why it shouldn't be specific to any type of fuel or resource. Countries are going to use resources they have. We should use resources we have. We should use them as clean as we possibly can and get them to zero emission. So we should really focus on American resources for us and recognize globally that India is going to use the resource it has. So if we can't abandon the technology here, or we're not going to accomplish much. I don't think China's going to give up any of their resources. So we just have to be cognizant of domestic policies will either enhance the ability to reduce global emissions or reduce the ability to reduce global emissions. And just talking about U.S. emissions is dangerous of a policy lens if you care about climate change. So I'll leave it at that.
Absolutely agree, Marty. Thanks for that. And we're at the top of the hour, so we'll wrap up here. In classic fashion, I got a number of questions within the last 5 and 10 minutes, and we're not going to have time to get into those. But the point has been proven. Conservatives are doing a lot. You all have a lot of skin in the game. Thank you for your leadership and your hard work. Some key messages that came across to me during this conversation is we need to focus on the right policies. They have to be smart policies that will work not just for Americans, but Marty, to your point, to reduce global emissions. To keep that as a part of the focus. But Kelly, I think one of the things that you said over and over was the process matters too. And I think that linking back to what Payne said at the top, process was a part of the success, following the rules and going through the steps that are needed to build and achieve consensus. Very fortunately, we've got some good examples of how it can work with Growing Climate Solutions, Energy Act of 2020. So I think there's a lot of cause for optimism. So we'll end here. But thank you very much for your time and attention and participating in the panel here. Have a good rest of the day and enjoy the rest of the summer. Thanks all.
Thank you, Charles.